I felt like I was a very spiritual child in terms of the church and things like that. Like, we were Catholics, but we weren't sort of hardcore at all. But I had like a little statue of Jesus that I used to pray to, and I really felt very connected for some reason, even though my family wasn't all into that.
What happens to religious faith when you think you've seen something supernatural? Today in Ghostly Encounters, we'll meet a man and a woman who have lived that question. Hello, I'm Lawrence Chow. You know, when a lot of us were growing up, you just didn't miss church on Sunday. But today's world is spinning a whole lot faster, and faith, for people of many religions, is often put on the back burner. But sometimes a brush with the supernatural can revive a faith lying dormant. As a young mother, Carolyn had nightmares about losing her children. But when the nightmares turned real, she had a spiritual experience that she'll never forget.
My sisters and I took all our children and we collected them and we took them off to the PNE, which is the exhibition in Vancouver. And the day we went happened to be Children's Day. I had Connor, who was 3, and Brendan, we were pushing in the stroller. Connor was very, very interested in the motorcycle ride. You know, he absolutely loved it. So we let him do that. And then off we went on our merry way. The baby was in the stroller and Connor was right beside me. And then he wasn't. And I said, Ginny, where's Connor? And she said, Kathy, where's Connor? And none of us knew where he was. And we each thought the other was watching him. I will always, always, till the day I die, remember the panic that just flooded through my body. I just started running. And as I'm running towards him, I'm getting more and more scared because I'm thinking, but what if he isn't there? Then what? I don't know what my next move is. I don't know. And I got to the motorcycles and he wasn't there and they hadn't seen him and they didn't know who I was talking about. And so I started to run as fast as I could run. And I ran out of the little kid playland area and then I started calling that God. And I don't know if the face was in my head yet then or not. I don't think it was. But I just started calling, help, 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 help my little boy, help me find my little boy, help me find my little boy, help me find my little boy. And I swear to God, the weirdest thing happened. It was like I hit a wall, like an invisible force field. Boom! Like a big hand came out and just went and pushed me here and just went, stop. And I dropped to my knees and I started to pray. And I was in the middle of the PNE with thousands of people around me, on my knees on the pavement, crying my eyes out and saying, help me find my little boy. And this thing just took this hand, took my head and turned it. And there he was. And he was 20 feet away from me. And he was all alone. And there was nobody near him either. It was like we were the only 2 people in the world. And he was standing there crying quietly. And if that hadn't stopped me, I was going that way. And I wouldn't have seen him. And I wouldn't have found him. And I ran over and I grabbed him and I hugged him and I loved him. I think there are many names for God, and people might call it their name, and And they might say it was God, or they might say it was an angel. I think it was one of God's angels. That's the face that I can put to God.
Angels are believed to have no freedom of choice. They are merely agents of God's will. The exception is Lucifer, the fallen angel. In Milton's Paradise Lost, Lucifer chose to reign in hell rather than serve God in heaven. So if angels do God's bidding, it's not surprising to hear that Carolyn feels God directed an angel's hand to help her. But before that day, there were years when Carolyn wouldn't even say God's name.
I can't believe I'm going to tell you this. I had a really horrific thing happen to me when I was a teenager. It was a sexual assault is what happened. And I didn't tell my mom and dad, and I didn't tell anybody until years later, you know. But at the time, I didn't tell anyone. Yeah, and so because I didn't tell anyone, I was alone with it. And you start to develop a sense of your own self-sufficiency, and you trick yourself into thinking that you are capable of dealing with it. Because I was a very capable person. I was quite bright, and I could do things, and I thought, well, and this I can also do, and so I isolated myself from everything, from everybody, and from God, from that face. And I stopped talking to him about things.
Carolyn turned away from God after going through that terrifying ordeal. She found her way back to him on the midway because she felt he answered her cry for help. That renewal of faith convinced Carolyn she wasn't alone, and that she could now confront her attacker and send him to jail 16 years after the assault. But as she re-embraced her faith and prepared to go to court, the attack took on new resonance and challenged her faith yet again.
My head was into, okay, in a month I have to go to trial, and it's going to be horrendous, and they're going to tear me apart and blah, blah, and I have to relive this whole horrible ordeal. And as I'm thinking about that, all those old feelings are coming back of I'm worthless and not worth loving, So yeah, vulnerable. I guess that would make me vulnerable to all kinds of things. It was very late at night. And then I heard and felt footsteps in the room coming in through the door and walking past the bed, and I couldn't see anything. I felt this sense of creeping evil that became overwhelming evil. I could feel it in my pores. I could feel it all around me. It was this, there is something unspeakably evil in this room right now with me. And then the chair moved as if whatever it was had climbed into the chair and rocked it forward and then rocked it back. And there it sat. I felt it watching me. I felt it sitting there, and I didn't ever see it, but I felt it sitting there in the chair that it had climbed into, and it was watching me, and I felt its eyes sort of boring through my head, and through the covers, watching. I've never, ever been so scared in all of my life, except for when I lost my son. And so I huddled under my covers, and then I came up for peeks, and then I started to pray, and it was that old prayer, the help me prayer. Help me, help me, help me, help me. And then on my next peek, the curtains did a little move, and I felt it leave. It sounds weird, which is why I hesitate saying it, but I feel like it was something that felt that I was at a vulnerable point and that maybe I could be attacked. Again, I asked for help and I got help, and that's why I left. I mean, because I didn't do anything except say, God, help me, help me, help me. You know, I didn't string out garlic or do any of the things people do, right? But something compelled it to leave.
Carolyn thinks she got help because she was ready to receive it. Her Catholic background made her open to the idea of spiritual beings in the world. Catholicism is one of the Christian streams that still embraces such a belief. Eric Robertson didn't grow up Catholic, but he was raised in an environment that allowed him, like Carolyn, to believe in spiritual beings.
All of my family were involved in some way in the book business. They were publishers, they were binders, they were proofreaders, they were all sorts of things. So I was surrounded by all manner of books when I was a child. And for some reason, there was a series of books that came from the 1880s by the people that had been involved in the Society for Psychical Research. So I heard all sorts of things about apparitions and thought transference and early hypnotism and that sort of thing. So that's always been of extreme interest to me. I come from a background in Edinburgh, the spiritualist movement is very, very strong. My aunt was a spiritualist and attended the Spiritualist Society in Edinburgh that was founded by Conan Doyle. In Scotland, a lot of these things are taken for granted, and taken for granted in a good way, in a, I'd say, childlike, naive way in a way. It just, these are things that can happen, and yeah, sure. And if you believe that, they do.
The spiritualist movement offered communication with the dead, and it was understandably popular in post-war Scotland. But Eric's passion lay in another direction. As a boy, all he wanted to do was play the organ, and that devotion led him into some frightening situations.
In the place that I did most of my practice, I would cycle to this church at night and park my bicycle in the graveyard. And then I'd have to go and get the key from the manse, which was across the graveyard. I would get the key and I'd have to come back through the graveyard, back into the church, and find the only light in the dark by feel. I had to feel along the walls, find out where it was, and then get the organ on and start to practice. And all of the time looking into a black void all around me. All I could see was the music about a foot beyond and then a black void. And that sets up a certain number of feelings. One is fear, which you constantly try and downplay it. My desire to play the organ was so strong that I was able to overcome that fear while I was playing. The hardest part was coming into the church, and even harder than that was going out. I always felt that I had to go real fast and get out of there quick, back into the graveyard. So essentially the feelings I had when I was really young were feelings of fear, combined with feelings of total exaltation. I mean, being a 10-year-old boy, being able to do whatever you wanted on a huge instrument was just, I mean, it's amazing. And I mean, I just no other way to describe that.
Despite his fear, Eric kept playing the organ. Eventually, his dedication brought him to Toronto, where he became known as one of the best organists in the country. It was there that the unseen specters he'd feared as a boy finally took shape.
I remember one day just being in the church, just playing, and I sort of had this feeling that somebody was with me. It's not an uncommon feeling, because if you're in a big building, you like to know if somebody's with you. Anyway, this one day, it was actually during the day, I was just sitting there, and I was positive somebody was there, but I was supposed to be alone. And out of the corner of my eye, I could see somebody sitting in the gallery of the church. And I was playing straight on, and the gallery was off to my right, and I immediately turned my head, and then it went away. Like, it was just because sometimes you get these little things out. I started playing again, and eventually I looked up again, and I found that if I didn't look, I could just kind of look ahead of me. I could just see it peripherally. And it would look like an old person. But I discovered if I looked at it, it would go away. And I thought, oh, that's really weird. And I was starting to feel a little strange, actually, because I'm getting this sort of prickly feeling on my neck and just feeling uncomfortable a bit. And I discovered that if I didn't look at it, it came back. And this person, I had the feeling it was an old lady, looked like an old lady to me, who appeared to be wearing just sort of not normal clothing, just sort of something. I think sometimes when we think we're frightened, I'm not sure that we actually are. I think we're just experiencing something important or something that's got a real rush to it, you know. And I think that's an important distinction. So I think when I felt what I thought was frightened, I think it's more complicated than that. I don't think it's just, you know, somebody's chasing you with a cleaver or something. That's terror. This is not fear, it's not terror. It's an awareness that something significant is happening.
Often those who think they've seen a ghost deny it. They're afraid of being called crazy. They have what our psychotherapists call a strong adult ego state, the so-called thinking mechanism. Rather than deny it, Eric tested his adult ego by asking for more evidence. He told the apparition to bring it on.
That was the first thing I did when I went back, and I had to look up in the gallery and see if she was still there, because she wasn't. But started thinking more and more about what does that mean? Like, why was she there? Like, why would that happen? You know, just that doesn't happen. I mean, why? You know? And then it happened again, and this time I thought to myself, you know, this is not scary anymore. This is interesting. This is really, really interesting. And I just went through the same process again, but not with the same degree of wanting to look. I just kept on playing, and I got the impression that I was with somebody and that somebody was with me, and everything was okay, you know. I had a really strong feeling of not being alone. She's wise and she's friendly. I think she's friendly. She's certainly powerful. She's completely silent. Completely and utterly silent. It's like being in a vacuum. It's like being in a recording studio with nobody in it. It's just dead. There's just nothing happening at all in the air. Nothing. Got the feeling that everything sort of went quiet and stood still. It's an envelopment of quiet. I can stay doing what I'm doing and she'll stay where she is. And in terms of feeling, I do get a feeling. I get a feeling I guess a feeling of warmth. There's a feeling of safety, actually, in a funny sort of a way. The one thing about this whole thing that kind of I find upsetting is I can't talk to this person. I'd love to actually talk to her. Maybe I will. I don't know. So far, she's not available. She's inscrutable. She's totally quiet, and she's totally distant, and totally focused. Totally focused on me. There's always a reason for her being there. She doesn't just show up. There's always something that I just in progress, or something's going to happen, or something's not right. It's that premonition that things are going to be all right. But you got to take care of things. You know, it's not going to be all right if you keep on doing what you're doing. Things have to change. And it's a message. She's sort of a message.
Many religions, including some Jewish and Christian groups, steer away from the spirit world. There's a fear that when you open that door, evil can come in with the good. But as Carolyn and Eric's stories show us, accepting the idea that there are spirits can have a positive impact on faith. Carolyn needed the God she'd known as a child. Eric needed the reassurance that there is life beyond what we know here on earth, and both found their faith was made solid as a result of their encounters with the supernatural.
I am absolutely convinced that I'm not alone in this world. From that, I'm absolutely convinced of it. There is another part to life. There's another stream of life, and I can feel being in it, and I can feel being out of it.
I have an absolutely unshakable faith in God, and that's cool, and that stays with me through any amount of turmoil and any amount of things that could possibly cause me to question His presence in my life, and His power and the power of these angels. Anything that could ever cause me to question that, I just go, nope. You know what? I know, because I lived it, and I'm not given to flights of fancy at all.
This high-flying real-life series will have you airborne.
Can you get me an anxiety pill, please?
On Airline. Then, let the games begin on Caesars 24/7, where the stakes are high and the bets are real.
Whoa! You took my money!
Airline, followed by Caesars 24/7. Tuesday starting at 10, only on Bio. True story.
You hear people say it's like a train. It sounded like a train. It sounded like 40 trains.
It was the largest tornado outbreak in U.S. history. Over a 4-day period, the National Weather Service confirmed 358 twisters in 21 states, from New York to Texas. On April 27, 2011, delivery man Jimmy Jones found himself right in the middle of the chaos.
It was a F4. It was over 180 mile an hour winds, I was told. But it got wider after it had just touched down probably a half a mile from where I was at. It looked like it was 250, 300 yards from me when I first saw it.
Jimmy was driving his delivery truck down the interstate. He thought he only had one option, to make it to an underpass.
They say get in a ditch, but one of that magnitude, I wouldn't have never survived that. It was sucking things up out of the ground. But I felt led to go that bridge, and I knew I had to get there. They tell you don't get under a bridge. That's the worst thing you can do, but when that's all you got.
Once Jimmy made it to the underpass, the tornado was already on him. Jimmy remembers in the midst of the storm, he called out to God.
I was praying that the Lord would save me. I'd get out of the truck, jump over the guardrail and start up that hill, and that hill is about as steep as these walls in this home. And me trying to run, and the wind's already hit me in the face and throwing things. I mean, there's debris coming at me. And I mean, I'm digging, trying to get up that hill. And I didn't think I was gonna make it.
When he made it to the top of the underpass, someone was already there.
When I got up under there, I see this fella sitting on this blanket. I was scared out of my mind. And I run up and got right in his face. I said, "Sir, we gotta take cover, it's a tornado." And he looked at me and he stood up. And it was like everything slowed down at that point. He said, "Is that right?" And that's all he said. And he said it, no concern. It was just like, "What are you worried about?"
Deep within a crevice under the bridge, Jimmy grabbed a piece of metal pipe attached to the concrete.
It felt like a piece of metal up in there, a metal rod. It was further back up in there, and I just grabbed it.
Debris pelted Jimmy's back.
It felt like somebody stabbing you in the back with an ice pick. And then it had some draw to it. It tried to pull you out. But I was far enough back up in there, and I remember I was pulling hard into that V, and they were tied up against my shoulders.
After what felt like an eternity, the wind finally ended. The man was still nearby.
When it was all over with, and I come out from that little cubby hole that I was in, I remember looking and seeing him stand back up over there. I didn't see him get up under anything. I didn't see him crawl out from under things. It's just when I got down and looked over there, I seen him stand back up.
Soon after the twister left, emergency personnel arrived on the scene.
I saw my truck tore up. There were people screaming. Paramedics and police were there on the scene right already. There's a lot of cars flipped upside down, tore up in the road and stuff. The paramedics were looking in the vehicles, and they were asking where I was, and I heard them, and I said, "Here I am," and I run down the embankment, stepped over. I said, I'm up here with this fella, and I turned around and pointed, and there wasn't nobody up there. There wasn't no blanket up there, there wasn't no man up there, and the only way he could have come down was with me or beside me. He had come down the same way I did because there was so much destruction on both sides of the embankment of that overpass. And I asked people there, "Did y'all see another fella?" No, we didn't see him. Well, he may have got sucked up in the tornado. I said, "No, he was there. I saw him. I know what I saw."
He believes God sent him an angel to help him face the incredible force of that F4 tornado.
A preacher friend of mine said that he believed that the Lord put him there to calm me.
Jimmy says God taught him a few important lessons in the storm.
God is and has been wonderful to me. He's a loving God. He's a caring God. He's my Lord and Savior. Here we need to be doing things for him, because when it's all said and done, nothing else is going to matter.
September 25th, 2012. Cops follow a tip. The man they're after is inside an apartment building. Officer Ali Perez takes the lead.
I was in charge of investigating a case where the woman discovered that her 2 daughters were being molested by her live-in boyfriend.
As they approach, the suspect, Daniel Witzak, is waiting, armed with a high-powered rifle.
He won't come to the door.
Sheriff's office, open up!
I mule kick the door. The door goes flying open, and I take one step, and he opens fire. The first round hits me in the left arm. right here, right in the middle of my arm.
Officer Perez and his partner return fire. The suspect is wounded but keeps shooting. Perez can't find cover. He takes more hits before he and the shooter empty their clips.
It's a race to reload. I was having a very hard time coming to terms with the fact that this is where I was going to meet my end, that I was going to die right here, and I knew it, and there was nothing I could do to change it. And I expect a bullet to the head any moment. And that's when the miracle happens. Our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, was there. I didn't see him appear, but he was in between us. He was already there when I raised my eyes. And it was magnificent. I knew one or two things was going to happen. Either one, I'm going home to the Lord, or two, I'm going home to Gracie and the kids, and either one is a win. And I said, Lord, I trust you completely. What do you want me to do with this guy? And I watched him. He picked up the feather that was in the ink bottle, and he wrote. And then he put the feather back in the ink bottle. And this note, it was the size of a 3x5 index card. It flies off the desk like a leaf in the wind. And I watched it with my eyes. I tracked it with my eyes. And then I came down here and it landed right here on my vest. And I pick it up and I read it. And it says, I want you to bless him. Now, keep in mind, this is a guy that just ripped my arm almost completely off, shot a hole through my body, shot the supervisor, horribly molested these two little girls. Jesus didn't say reload and finish the job. He said, I want you to bless him. So I looked right at the bad guy and said, God bless you, brother.
Officer Perez sees more visions before noticing Witzak staring at him.
Looks at me and he asked me, would you like to crawl out to your friends now? Real, almost, his mannerisms changed. Now up to this point, I don't know if he sees Jesus or not. I have no idea, I don't know. So I said, yes. I said, yeah, I'm ready to go.
Witzak helps Perez towards the front door. By now, a backup team has arrived and they start firing. Witzak retreats. Perez is left alone. And then, the door opens on its own.
I'm in no condition to open doors and turn handles and do all this stuff. Bad guy never made it to the door. Rescue team's at the bottom of the stairs. They never made it to the door. How did the door get opened? God opened that door.
Officer Perez crawls to the doorway and a member of the rescue team carries him to safety. Witzak eventually surrenders and is taken into custody, while Perez is taken to the ER to fight for his life. Doctors tell his family he has no chance of survival.
Everybody dropped on their knees right there and started praying, and not just at the hospital, but at the Santee station and at stations all across the county. Everybody got on their knees and prayed because the word went out like fire. And I'm alive because of the power of prayer.
After 27 surgeries and hours of grueling physical therapy, Officer Perez testifies at Witzak's trial. He takes the opportunity to extend grace to the man who tried to kill him. Daniel Witzak is currently serving a life sentence. Ali Perez is medically retired and continues to recover. But he says he's gained far more than he's lost.
I got to spend 3 minutes with Jesus before my day of judgment. And if I got some cuts and bruises along the way and I lose the use of my arm, it was worth it. Every heartbeat and every breath is a gift from God. Oh, I am so thankful. I am thankful to be here. I'm thankful for the opportunity to testify to people that He is true, that God is real, that Jesus loves us so very, very, very much. And there's an opportunity that we got to, before it's too late, get on our knees, humble ourselves before Him, and get right with the Lord.
Success does many things to people. To me, it brought about not only accomplishments, but it brought about pride.
Every home Alan Youngblood built, he built well.
I would look at myself and think that these accomplishments were absolutely all mine. Never even imagined that possibly in the background there could have been a God who was directing my life.
Alan ran a successful business constructing multi-million-dollar commercial buildings and luxury mansions. And everyone knew not to cross Alan Youngblood.
I became a person of anger, explosive, almost to the point of danger sometimes. Anger became the thing that ruled my life. in so many ways. It gave me power. It gave me position.
And even though Alan went to church, his beliefs kept him far from God.
The way I saw God was that He was a God that knew everything that I did and saw every sin that I ever committed, and possibly writing them down in a book in heaven. I found it impossible to love a God who was out to get you.
Then one night on New Year's Eve, Alan went to church. As he stood at the communion rail, he says his soul was transported to another place, where he heard a voice that sounded like rushing waters.
The scripture came to me, and it says, if you say you love God and you hate your brother, you are no more than a liar and a murderer.
At that moment, he repented of his sins and experienced the forgiveness of God, something he had never really felt before. Alan was then carried away to a beautiful city with a gate made of pearl.
But when I walked through those gates, my mind could not even conceive what I would see. Have we read about the streets of gold? Yes, but they were different. They were suspended like a mighty highway with no visible means of suspension. As I neared that area, I saw cascading out of the throne of God a massive waterfall from which I believe flows the river of life.
Then Alan says he saw a friend named Jerry. Jerry had died years earlier in a fiery plane crash, but here in his vision, Jerry appeared normal, wearing a blue suit.
He turned and he held his hand and pointed toward the top of the platform of the throne of God. I thought, oh, am I going to see God?
A few moments later, Alan says he was standing as he had been at the front of the church. Alan's wife, Barbara, remembers what happened.
I didn't know what he was doing. It was, troubled me. I thought, oh my goodness, this is embarrassing. He's gone to sleep.
I said, honey, I did not go to sleep. And I can't tell you what happened to me until some other time.
For days after his heavenly encounter, Alan continued to be affected by what he remembered.
His whole attitude was one of softness. The hard look that he had was gone.
Alan began to speak publicly about his experience in heaven. At one meeting, he saw the widow of his friend Jerry, the man in the blue suit that he had seen in heaven. As Alan described the scene, Jerry's widow spoke up. She revealed she had given the blue suit to the funeral director to put into the coffin, even though her husband's body had been so badly burned. That suit was the same suit Alan says he saw Jerry wearing in heaven. That's when Alan realized why he had seen his friend in heaven.
To go back home, to tell one woman, there is a God, there is a heaven, there's life after death, and Jerry's there.
Alan continues to tell others that heaven is real in a new book called Voice of Many Waters.
God's greatest desire is that you know who He is and how He is and how much He loves you. It's impossible not to fall in love with Him when you really begin to have that relationship, the greatest relationship you will ever know.
In September 1996, Hurricane Fran slammed into the Carolinas. In the storm's aftermath, Georgia power worker Rick Moncrief was assigned to clear downed power lines in North Carolina. He was on a rooftop trying to pull a line from under a fallen tree when the line snapped. He fell backwards and landed headfirst on the concrete driveway. He was flown to Duke Medical Center. His wife Donna was told to prepare for her husband's funeral.
I felt a lot of fear, and I felt concern, and I had every scenario going through my brain. How am I going to raise 3 daughters by myself? I'm too young to be a widow. You name it, those kind of thoughts came through my head.
Rick had several broken ribs, and his brain was hemorrhaging. 10 minutes after he arrived at the hospital, he slipped into a coma.
He was hooked up to a breathing machine and all kinds of machines. And so I just looked at him, I was like, I was in shock, I think. I couldn't believe that he was laying there. And the doctors were just saying that it was a wait-and-see game. They didn't know. I believed in prayer, and I knew that Jesus was the healer. In my own strength right that moment, I didn't have that strength in myself to pray. And so I had believers and friends who were praying for me, as well as for Rick, that we would, that we would be able to come through this.
The prayers continued, and by day 5, Rick was still unresponsive. At least it appeared that way.
I was taken into the throne room of God. It was more real than you are. It was so real, and everything was just so white, whiter than white. And I was on my belly, on my face before the Lord, and I saw his feet. I didn't see his face, but he asked me, what do you want to do? And I kept hearing the scripture over and over, whose report will you believe? Will you believe the report of the Lord or believe the report of the doctors? And I said, I want to live. I want to live and declare the word of the Lord. And he stood up and he clapped his hands and he said, that's enough. And when he said, that's enough, I began immediately to come out of the coma.
His doctor said Rick would never be the same again. Rick and Donna believed differently.
She said, well, you're the most luckiest person in the world now that you ever came out of this coma. And you recovered from this fall a little bit, but it'll be 60 months minimum, which is 5 years, before you will ever be 40% back. And I told her, I said, no, ma'am. I said, I don't mean any disrespect at all to you, but I said, it's not going to take that long. The Lord's going to do a quick work.
During rehab, Rick says he read Psalms in the Bible, and he and Donna joined their friends and family in prayer.
I was believing for the healing, and my friends were believing for the healing, because we believe by his stripes we are healed.
Each day his health improved, and after just 27 days of rehab, Rick had a 95% recovery.
When I came back to work at the power company in the early part of 1997, I came back to work full duty.
The faithfulness of God comes to my mind, that our God, at the immediate cry of our heart, will hear us, and he listens, and he's faithful.
The great doctors at these two great hospitals did all they could do, but it was the Father's love. It was his grace. It was his compassion on me to allow me to live today and live these 18 years since this has happened.
Rick later retired from the power company and became a pastor. He cherishes every moment he has with his wife and family and says he doesn't let a day go by without giving thanks to God for his miraculous healing.
Every day is an incredible day. Every day is just, there's always a lot to be thankful for. I'm just thankful that I feel better today than I did yesterday. I'm thankful today that I'm able to stand up. I'm thankful today I don't have a massive headache this morning. I'm thankful today that I'm able to breathe by myself without a machine. I'm just thankful.
It's been over a year since I read the book upon which the movie is based, so I was able to watch the film with a fresh perspective. We see an ordinary, small Nebraska town challenged by an unforeseen act of God. At first, it could almost be dismissed, but not so by the end of the movie. Greg Kinnear is perfect as Todd Burpo, an unassuming Wesleyan pastor who would rather be called by his first name than Reverend. He's a family man who also runs a carpet business and serves as a volunteer firefighter. Burpo is totally in love with his wife Sonia. Newcomer Connor Coram was cast as Colton. He totally captures the innocent faith of Burpo's son in the book. Everyday life was shattered when Colton's appendix burst. Todd retreats to the hospital chapel and shouts at God, "Don't you take my son!" The boy recovers, and life reverts to normal. That is until Colton starts talking about angels and seeing his body from above on the operating table. He even tells his dad he saw him yell at God. Burpo has a crisis of faith, saying, "We ask these kids to believe this stuff, and I don't know if I believe it myself." Over time, he becomes more convinced of Colton's experience as the boy shares details he has no natural way of knowing. This creates friction in the marriage because Sonia is more skeptical of her son's revelations. There's also conflict at the church. It's interesting to watch God at work in the movie. As humans, we typically try to change people's minds by trotting out our most convincing evidence first. But the Lord, it seems, may choose to act more like an orchestra conductor, guiding the symphony to its climax. I don't want to give it all away, but I will tell you this. God's dealings with Colton were verified by a comparable miracle in the life of a Lithuanian girl. Columbia Pictures was smart to partner with well-known TV pastor T.D. Jakes as producer. I give Heaven is for Real high marks for both professionalism and spirituality. This is Steve Eastman reporting.
Discover more stories like this one on our website, waittillyouhearthis.com.
I was straight-lined, I mean totally straight-lined, out of my body, dead for an hour and a half. My name is Richard Cole, and I am 72 years old. I have never been what I would call religious. I've always believed that there was a God, and I believed that there was Jesus, but I've had doubts. I've been a doubter before, but I'm no longer that. And this happened to me in 2005, so that was 6 years ago. And so how it came about was that I was on my way to Monterey. I go up there every year for the historic car races. While I was stopped at the stoplight, I had a pain that started in my jaw, right in the mandibular area, went down my jawbone, down my carotid artery, and into my chest. I said, "Oh, this is strange." My friend and his wife said, "What's wrong with you? You don't look very good. What's your symptoms?" I said, "Well, my hands feel a little sweaty and I feel a little clammy." I said, "I don't know what's going on." He says, "I'm going to take you to the hospital." I said, "Oh, I'll be okay. I'll go home and take an aspirin. This will be done with." He says, "No, we're going right now." So we went in and they put me on a gurney because there was no room in the emergency room. My blood pressure was extremely high, and they gave me a couple of shots right away to try and get my blood pressure down. And then I went right into the x-ray room, and they gave me some x-rays, and came back in a little while, and Steve, the doctor, a friend of mine, says, "You have a serious problem." I said, "Oh, really?" And he says, "Yes." He says, "You have an aneurysm, but what's worse, it's split, and I think you're bleeding internally." 5 o'clock the next morning, I was in the pre-op, or the ready room rather, at Cottage Hospital. Anesthesiologist came in and says, "Well, I'm going to, give you a shot right now, and then you're going to go off to sleep." I said, "Okay." I said, "Is the doctor here yet?" "Yeah, he's here." So I asked to see him. I said, "Okay, what are you guys going to do to me?" And he says, "Well," he says, "what we have to do is cool you down to a real low temperature, and when we do that, it'll be just like chopping a hole in Lake Michigan in the ice in the middle of the winter. Everything's going to stop. Your brain's going to stop, and your heart will stop." I said, "Well, I've never heard of that before, and I read a lot." And he says, "Well," he says, "we usually don't tell our patients what we're going to do to them, or else they'd run down the hall dragging the IV behind them." They told me when I went in that I'd have about a 50-50 chance of making it. I found out later with that kind of operation where they take your heart out, you have a 10% chance of survivability. So the anesthesiologist put the IV in. I went off to sleep right away, and they start rolling me down the hall to the operating room. And then I realized that I was still conscious and I wasn't under yet. It was like I was for a little bit, but then I was awake again. And I saw him roll me into the operating room. And so I wanted to tell the doctors that, hey, you got to give me some more of whatever it was you gave me because I'm not out yet. But I couldn't speak. I didn't have any pain or anything like that. I just could not open my mouth and get the words out, even though I tried very hard to tell him that I was still conscious. So I'm laying on the table, and there are 3 doctors standing over me and 2 nurses, and they all have their gowns on, their masks on and everything. They're ready to go. And I heard the doctor ask the nurse for the scalpel, and she got it, and she started to open me up from right here down to here. He did. Opened me up like that, and then they got an electric saw out and started cutting my breastbone open. And then I saw them go down and start to take my heart out, and then everything went black. But I was still conscious, but I couldn't see anything. And it was like a heavy black fog, and I'm just standing there looking around. I couldn't figure out what to do next or what was going to happen next. Right then, 2 beams of light came over my right shoulder. So I started to turn around and look over my shoulder to see where it was coming from. And then I heard a voice. And the voice was very authoritative, not loud, but he says, "Don't turn around." And I'm thinking, well, why not? And he says, "Don't turn around because if you see my face, you'll have to stay here." And he says, "Now, that'll be okay if you stay here, but I have a job for you. And if you disobey me, I won't be happy." And he says, "You don't want to see me unhappy." So I said, "Yeah, well, okay. I better pay attention and do what he says." And then I said, "You know, I know who you are." He said, "Oh, you do?" And I said, "Yeah." And all during this conversation, I had a feeling of where he was, that he was walking back and forth behind me, that he was sitting in a white throne, just a plain chair, didn't have jewels or anything on it, but just a plain white chair. And I could just feel that, and I don't know why. That's what I was feeling. The next thing that happened is he said, "Do you have any more questions before you leave?" I said, I said, "You know, I got to think about this." And I thought, I was thinking really hard, what am I going to ask God? Couldn't think of anything. I wanted to be really smart enough to ask him something very pertinent. And so I said, well, I'm going to have to revert to an old cliche. What's the meaning of life? And he starts laughing again. I said, what's so funny now? And he says, well, I don't know why, but a lot of people ask me that question. And it's really real simple. But I tell you what, when you come back, we'll sit down. You can ask me all the questions that you ever will have. I'll answer them for you. So I said, okay. He says, okay, it's time for you to go back. And I turned around. I'm sorry, but he put his arms around me. He put his arms around me. And it was a feeling that I can't explain. It was unconditional love, but it was words. I can't tell you the words. And I'm sorry, but I always act like this because I can feel it again. So, it changed my life. And the next thing I heard was the nurse was saying, I think he's ready to come out of it. His temperature's at 90 degrees. 9 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. First thing I wanted to do was go out and tell everybody I knew what happened to me. But I'll have to tell you that my life has changed completely. I'm no longer afraid of death. All the problems that I thought were problems are all gone. I don't have any problems. I don't have anything that gets me down. A week later, a guy came in that I knew, and he said, I heard about your experience. I said, yeah, it happened. You know, he said, I heard that you were, you had a near-death experience and that you were out for about an hour. And I said, yeah, that's true. And he said, well, the same thing happened to me. And I said, and then I asked him what the meaning of life was. And he says, oh, that's easy. It's all about love. That was the perfect answer. So I got that message right away. Now I study the Bible, and it's taken me a long time. I've been doing it for 6 years. I'm up to Matthew. I've translated every word from the original manuscripts into English. I was baptized recently. People ask me questions about that. Well, why are you getting baptized now? And I said, because it's the right time. I don't know what else to tell them. I don't believe that you have to be baptized to go to heaven, but I know one thing. I want to follow what Jesus did. He set an example. I want to, so I did.